Hello everyone, today we're going to be looking at the grid technique for drawing. It's a way to break down drawings into more digestible chunks, and so I'll explain that in just a bit. So let's go ahead and get started and I'll demonstrate this technique for you.
All right, the tool we're going to be using for this grid technique that'll cut out a lot of the work for you all is this grid drawing tool on Art Tutor. So if we go there, you will see that there are a series of steps that we want to go through. So you want to select an image, find an image. Once you find an image that you want to use for this project, we're going to go ahead and upload it. So I'm going to go through this and show you. So I've chosen an image of George McDonald. Okay. And so now I'm going to go on to the next step, which is rotate. And I can rotate the image if I want to. I'm not going to bother with that. And I can also crop this image if I want to. So I could maybe possibly do like some kind of crop down, up close version, zoomed in on the face. That might make an interesting work of art. I'm not going to do that, but I could. Oops. All right. And so I'm going to go next. You can adjust the brightness. You can adjust the contrast. I'm going to put it back about where it was though. So depending on the image, you may want to mess with that to make it easier to draw. So you just want all the features and the lines of the face and everything to be very clearly visible and distinguishable. Okay. And then we're on to the grid itself. So this is a lot of work to draw this grid on your work yourself. I mean, it's not unmanageable, it's not unthinkable, but but this is saves you a lot of time and effort. So I'm going to go ahead and do 10 grids. I think you need to at least do 10 so that you can get the right level of detail and the right level of ease. I'm going to keep it on red, but I'll just show you I can change different colors. So if I'm drawing something red and I don't want my line to fade away, I can change it to blue, but I'm going to go, or any of these other colors. I'm going to go ahead and keep it back on red. I think that's a good one. So you may not be able to draw an eye, but you will be able to draw a triangle, right? So it breaks it down in these bite-sized segments. If you go over here, it's about 2/3 of the way through this line right here, or down through this line right here. So we'll go almost at the bottom here, draw out to about a third in, and we'll come back to about halfway up this one. And there you got it. You got part of that eye. You can't draw an eye. Oh, well, you can at least draw a triangle. And so you break these up into little bitty steps, one little thing, one little line at a time. And now we're ready to actually print this out. So I can download it, save the file. Move it over here to the desktop. Okay. And then here it is. I'm ready to print this. So I can go ahead now and adjust this the way I want it. Be a little smaller, right, to save a little bit of ink. But now we've got a grid that's pretty tolerable. The more detail you want to get, the more precise you want to get, the smaller you want these squares to be. That way you're just going line to line, grid to grid, just making lines. Okay, so, but the more lines you put on here, on the grid, the more you have to erase off your final product, and the more work you have to do to draw the grid on another sheet of paper, on your new sheet of paper, where you're going to actually compose this drawing. Okay. All right. So let's look at the next step.
Here we have our gridded out reference photo right next to our blank drawing paper. We now have to put the same type of grid on the blank paper. Today we're going to make these roughly the same size. Maybe the one I'm doing is going to be slightly smaller. However, you can upscale this just by doubling these. So instead of making these 1/2 inch squares, you could easily double this up and make 2 inch squares or 4 inch squares. so this is easily scalable. So now we're just picking a side to label with letters and numbers. Usually I use my letters on the shorter side and my numbers on the longer side, but we have plenty of alphabets for the longest side of this, so it doesn't really matter. You can stop once you have either the top or the bottom labeled and one of the sides labeled. I like to label both sides, that way it's easily accessible no matter where I'm at on the drawing. Now I'm ready to replicate this grid on my other paper. Like I said before, it is easy to scale up. However, since I'm using a smaller sheet of paper, I'm going to keep it roughly the same size. I'm just going to come by and make a mark every ½ inch. It's important to remember that if you started at the bottom on the left side, then you also need to start at the bottom on the right side. This will keep your grid from getting too lopsided. The same thing goes if you start at the top. You just want to make sure you do the same thing on both sides. It's also prudent to remember to do the same thing on the left and the right. If you start on the left side at the bottom, then you need to start at the left side at the top, and vice versa. To draw the grid, I'm going to use a lighter pencil than I will to make the actual drawing. I'm using a B, but I would probably use something even lighter than that if I weren't trying to get it to show up on the camera better. The darker you draw your grid, the harder it will be to get rid of it later. Now we just want to start lining up these lines with the ruler and creating our lines for our grid. We will repeat this process going both directions. That way we create a network of lines culminating in a grid pattern. Once we finish the grid, we can now label it to match our reference photo. As you may have already noticed, I got a little carried away when I was making my grid. That's okay. I can always scale it down to fit. That's exactly what I end up doing. I could leave it just like it is, but I want to go ahead and alter it to cut down on confusion. Moving my labels over will make it much easier to apply this technique. Now I just want to find a starting point on my grid. I've decided to start in E6, so now I just need to find that on my grid and mimic what I see in each square. So I noticed that George MacDonald's pupil starts really close to the left side of E6. It's almost touching it, so that's where I started. I then go up about 1/5 of the way up the line, and then I start to arch back down so that I land really close to 1/3 of the way across the bottom line. And I just keep following this same process of making sure my little lines and shapes are starting and ending in the correct spots on these lines. Once I get the pupil drawn in, I will then move on to the eye complex itself and end up starting the eye in E5, taking up about 1/3 of the bottom of the line in starting, and then making sure my line goes up about 1/4 of the way up the line on the right. I will continue on into the next grid, making sure that my eye comes down and the line terminates a little over halfway through the bottom of the next square in E6. I'm very careful to note where each line starts and finishes in each square and how high up and down they go. I'm using each square as a frame of reference to see where each line or simple shape that I'm creating will stop, start, and what it will do in between that stopping and starting. Now I'm locating where I want to begin the bridge of George MacDonald's nose. I've ascertained that it begins in E4, and so now I will find that, locate it on my grid on my drawing paper, and I'll begin replicating what I see. All the while paying attention to how close or far away George MacDonald's line on the outside of his nose is getting to the line on E4, and then down on F4, and further on down to G4. I'm now going to change the speed and speed this up so that it doesn't waste too much class time. However, you can always change the playback speed on YouTube. Furthermore, you can always pause whenever you need to see what I'm doing in more detail. Something that I find helpful is when I create diagonal lines, I see how big the triangles are that I'm creating across my grid. With the beard and the mustache, I'm following the overall lines where they roughly end, but it's a very soft edge due to all of the hairs. So I'm taking a little bit more creative license with the hair. I could make sure that I put every line and every value exactly where it goes in each square. However, I've decided to be a little more free than that and a little more expressive. I've also used the grid to decide where I'm going to place some of my values, and I punched them in really quickly. A great example of this would be the shadows above George MacDonald's eyes. Now I'm just going to come in and put in some more of the details and try to finish this drawing up a little. I'll lay in some values and clean the drawing up. I'll eventually come in and try to erase some of the grid and get rid of it, although I'll leave it visible as a reference for you. Once again, the tighter the grid, the more accurate the face or whatever you're drawing is going to be, and that can really make a big difference on facial features. Just a little bit off one way or the other can change a person completely. I could still stand to clean up the grid some more, however I'm going to leave it for your benefit. So here is the finished product, or as finished as I'm going to get it. I hope that this helps everyone. Until next time.